End of the war, 2009, the then government, Mahinda Rajapaksa, and the then UN Secretary General, Ban Ki-moon, came to an understanding. It's a public document. It's something that says, it's a public statement, it says, certain things happened and the government of Sri Lanka will take the lead in addressing what happened, having genuine processes in Sri Lanka, and making sure there is a solution, a political solution in Sri Lanka. This is a public statement. So after the end of the war, May 2009, this statement started a process where the then government said they will look into it. Now, remember the initiative, the LLRC, that was created in 2010. So that came after this statement. In 2010, when the LLRC happened, that went around the country, that looked into issues, the LLRC said there needs to be independent investigations, people have to go back home. Those who came to the LLRC said many were disappeared. They have a separate chapter on enforced disappearances. So they have a report that captures a lot of the ground realities. But much has not been implemented. And that comes to the question of political will. But what happened as a result of 2009 is the UN Human Rights Council in Geneva. How many know about the UN Human Rights Council? Okay, most know. Okay. UN Human Rights Council is a body that comprises of member states. Sri Lanka was a member before, no longer a member. It's an election. Every few years, members get elected to sit in the council. The UN Human Rights Council has looked at different country studies. Sri Lanka is just one of them. Most recently, it looked at what happened in Myanmar, or what's happening in Myanmar. It's looked at Syria, it's looked at Iraq, Afghanistan, Yemen, across the region, across the world. So Sri Lanka, when the government promised in 2009 they'll do certain things to address what happened, and it didn't follow through with some of their own promises, the UN Human Rights Council looked at Sri Lanka and several resolutions were passed. 2009, 2012, 2013, 14, 15, and 2015 resolution is where the government promised to do all of these things. So this came about because since 2009, the government promised to do certain things. They didn't do everything. And then when there was a change in 2015, the then foreign minister went and said, yes, we will do some of these things. And that's what's in here. So the UN Human Rights Council played a role in getting these promises, but these promises came from Sri Lanka. This is not an internationally imposed set of promises. This is not someone saying, okay, from outside you need to do this. This is something Sri Lanka, the government said we need to do, because the LLRC and a few other initiatives already had identified the problems. This is not something just we realized after the end of the war. During the war there was recognition that people need to go home. People need to know what happened. Thousands of people still don't know where their loved ones are missing. So We come full circle in terms of these. While it were promised in 2015, these discussions have been there for many years. So I don't need to go through everything, but just remember some of it has already been done or is under progress. So if you look at some progress, I mean, we are in this weekend I think people will be like, what's the point? But I think it's very important to recognize for people in those areas, for victims, some progress has happened. The Office of Missing Persons is one, the OMP. It's gone around the country. It's gone to Jaffna, Mullaitivu, Mana, Matara, Kandy, to talk to those families who are still looking for their missing loved ones. And it's starting investigations. On the 30th of this month, in 2 days, we mark the day of the disappeared. It's an international day. Yesterday, very close to here in Sidua, there was a function where families of the disappeared met. There is a memorial there, where many who lost loved ones even in the 80s, 70s, 80s came yesterday. While you were here, this was happening, where they said, we still want to know. We want to know what happened. So the OMP is meant to do that. So some progress. It hasn't found answers yet because it only started working in March. We now have a law which was enacted this year, which criminalizes anyone who tries to abduct, keep someone against their will, and has powers to prosecute. Now, this is a very important law because, as I said, justice is important. Non-recurrence is important. If you have a law to prosecute, now whether they'll prosecute is another question, but you need first the law. You can't just have a kangaroo court. If you can address that, you can try to prevent someone being disappeared in the future. So this year, we also have enforced disappearances being brought into the law of Sri Lanka. So now it's an offense in Sri Lanka. If one of you is held against your will, no one knows, that's a disappearance. It's an enforced disappearance. And that person, if there's evidence, now I don't think you can just prosecute people, there has to be evidence, they can be prosecuted. We also have right to information. Now, I'm hopeful that many of you know what RTI is, right to information. It's a right that every citizen has to find out information. Right to know. So, if you know what right to information is, that's part of transitional justice. You might not think of it as transitional justice, but that's the right to know. And this, in the last few years, it has started working, RTI. We now have independent commissions. We have a Human Rights Commission, we have a Police Commission, we have independent institutions. All of that was brought by the 19th Amendment. Now the President can't just appoint, it has to go through Constitutional Council. That is progress. 19th Amendment also reduced the powers of the Executive President. So one person doesn't hold power in this country. There are checks and balances. That's connected to non-recurrence. We know what, when one individual has a lot of power, what can happen, the potential. So then one very important thing, this is something very close to my heart, land releases. Many in Sri Lanka, across Sri Lanka, from Jaffna to Trinco, to Panama, to Colombo, lost their houses because of high security zones, because of the war, because of development. I have personally gone to court to challenge the government when people have been arbitrarily displaced. How many people know about what the high security zone in Jaffna is about? For 30 years, people have been displaced. Sorry? It's not Tesavalame. Tesavalame is a customary law. In Jaffna, in other parts of Sri Lanka, when high security zones were created during the war, or post-war sometimes, people were displaced from their own homes. Now all of you have a home somewhere, which you go back to. After your session here, you go back home. Some of the people in parts of Sri Lanka, every community has been affected, lost their homes because of different actors deciding they want that land, sometimes overnight. We have been able to go to court, to the Supreme Court of Sri Lanka, Court of Appeal, to fight those which are arbitrary, which is unlawful, and land has been released. Just Wednesday I went to Trinco, to Sampur, where people who were displaced for 10 years are now living on their own homes and cultivating their land. So the last 3 years there's been land releases. That's important. For someone who can't go and live in their home, that's important. Some of us take it for granted, but land release, going back to your home, is so critical. We also now have witness victim protection, where people can get protection if they're under threat. That we didn't have before. If you're giving evidence in a case, or you have evidence against someone powerful, and you feel you're threatened, you can go to this authority and make a complaint. That's progress. How it will work in the future, I don't know. The Judicature Amendment is a new High Court. I mean, I don't have a lot of time, but basically, again, it's trying under justice to speed through some cases. And finally, the Office for Reparations, which I'll talk about very quickly. So the Office for Missing Persons, as I mentioned, started working this year. I just briefly went through it. And we'll see how it starts working. But the Office for Reparations is the latest mechanism, which connects to the Brown one. Now that law was passed this month in October, so very new. We don't know if it's actually how it's going to work. But if it starts working, if it's independent, if it's able to function, it can look at people who are still in displacement, those who require compensation, those whose houses are damaged. So reparations is very, very important for those who've been displaced, who've experienced violence, who don't have money to rebuild. All of that will be looked at by this office, but we don't know how it's going to work because they've just been set up this month. So to end this, what next? Many promises were made. There's been some progress, but there's so much more to do. So these are some of the areas that we should be thinking about. But I think for you all, what's important is, as young people who go back to your own communities, who think about what next for Sri Lanka, transitional justice is just one tool. But it's an important tool to understand because it looks at everything. It's up to you how you want to use it. Is it useful? It may be just one aspect of it. It may be just saying people need to go home, or people need to have answers. Or it may be something saying we need a new constitution that reflects the current challenges, that gives a vision, that empowers citizens of this country, whatever it is. This, you need to understand, is something we've been talking for years. It's not new. How you use it is up to you. Whether you'll use it, it's up to you. I'm just here to say what it is. But think of it, because we are going into several, I think, months and possibly years of challenges. Constitution challenges, legal challenges, political challenges. These just give you some ideas as to what can be done. As citizens, as young people, you have the right to shape Sri Lanka. Transitional justice merely gives you some ideas. So I'm going to end it there because I think there's a lot more. I've done several days of transitional justice. This is just starting a conversation. But I think we have a few minutes to also see if you have any questions, your own experiences. And there can be criticism, trust me. I have criticism of transitional justice. But think of it as just a tool that you can use. Can we do some question and answer? Yeah. So does anyone have question and answers, or do you have questions? Or is it all clear, or do you feel this is useless?
மேடம், நீங்கள் சொன்ன மாதிரி சொல்லியிருந்தீங்க வந்து இந்த வட மாகாணத்தில் இப்போ வந்துட்டு காணாமல் போன ஆட்கள் சம்மந்தமாக பேசியிருந்தீங்க. இப்போ உலகத்தில் உள்ள ஜென்ரல் ட்ரூத்தை எடுத்துக்கொண்டோம்னு சொன்னால் யூனிவர்சல் இது ஒன்று தான் ரூல்ஸ் ஒன்று தான் என்ன சொன்னால் நீதித்துறை. அப்போ நீதித்துறை சட்டம் வந்து நீதித்துறை எடுத்துக்கொண்டோம்னு சொன்னால் அதை யாராலையும் வந்துட்டு அதில் எந்த ஒரு லூஸும் லூஸ் வச்சுக்கொள்ளவும் மேலாது. இப்போ சட்டத்துறையில் நிர்வாகத்துறையில் எந்த அளவுக்கு நம்ம மாற்றங்கள் செஞ்சாலும் சட்டத்துறை நிர்வாகத்துறையில் எந்த அளவுக்கு நம்ம மாற்றங்கள் லூஸ் வச்சுக்கொண்டாலும் லூஸ் பண்ண இயலும்னாலும் நீதித்துறையில் வந்துட்டு அந்த ஒரு வேலையில் பண்ண இயலாது. என்ற நீதித்துறைங்கிறது வந்து யூனிவர்சல் ரீதியான ஒன்றுபட்ட ஒன்று. அப்போ அந்த அடிப்படையில் வடமாகாணத்தாள்களோட அந்த காணாமல் போன பிரச்சனையை மிச்ச காலம் வந்துட்டு இன்னும் வந்துட்டு பேசி கொண்டிருக்கிற ஒன்றுது. அப்போ நீங்கள் நினைக்கிறீங்களா வந்து ஸ்ரீலங்காவில் வந்துட்டு நீதித்துறை வந்துட்டு ஸ்ட்ராங்காக நான் பில்ட் பண்ண இயலும்னு சொல்லி நினைக்கிறீங்களா நீங்கள்? அதே நேரம் வந்துட்டு வடமாகாணத்தாள்களுக்கு அந்த சொல்யூஷன் இப்போவும் பெற்றுக்கொள்ள இயலும்னு நினைக்கிறீங்களா நீங்கள்?
Yeah, no, you have a very good question. There's laws, but the question of disappearances in the north is a big one. So your question, disappearances in the north, is a massive problem. But you now have laws, can it be addressed? I don't have an answer in that I can't say it's definitely going to work. But all I can say is, for several years, we've had commissions. We've had politicians saying we are going to do it. But we've never had an independent mechanism. Yeah, so I'm getting to that. So the Office of Missing Persons is the first independent mechanism. First. We've had several, but I don't think they were independent. So the OMP can only do as to what the truth is, which is this. OMP can only do this. But I agree the justice part, the yellow, is very important. I think without justice, you're not going to stop things in future. That's why I said the law which is criminalizing disappearances is critical. But it only came this year. So we have to also see if people are going to be prosecuted. Now personally for me as a lawyer, I'm going to do everything to see if people can be prosecuted, because in some cases there is evidence. So that's why I say when it comes to transitional justice, it's not going to happen overnight. You have to do all four really. But with the disappearances, what's the difference now is we finally have something which is independent, which is not linked to the government. So maybe this is the first time we can find answers. With answers, with the law, then you can prosecute. But without evidence, without answers, you can't also prosecute. So that's why they are both needed. So without prosecutions, if you can't hold someone accountable, you're not going to address non-recurrence. So in that, it's all connected. Can we try to prevent disappearances in future? I think we have the best case now. Will it work? It's all up to us also. Just saying there's a law, there's a mechanism, and sitting back is not going to work. That's why for young people, young and old, but for you all specifically, you have to keep the pressure. There are certain things that are now in place you can use. So in your areas, where are you from? Polonnaru. In Polonnaru, ask the questions. There are disappearances in Sri Lanka. There's been impunity in Sri Lanka where people are not prosecuted. Now we have two that can be used. Why is that not used? So OMP and the law were brought this year. OMP was established this year. Criminalizing disappearances was this year. Ask those questions. Publicly ask questions. Why is that not happening if it's not happening? But also give it a bit of time, because just having something doesn't mean it happens overnight. But keep the pressure. If public doesn't ask questions, politicians also will not do it. So political will is important. Now at least we have the ingredients to do it. Did I answer your question? Yeah? Yes, please.
இவ்வளவு நாளும் இவ்வளவு வருஷமாக வந்து வடமாநிலத்தாள்கள் வந்து இவ்வளோ நாளும் போராடிட்டு இருக்கிறாங்க. ஆனால் ஏன் இதுவரைக்கும் வந்து ஸ்ரீலங்கா கவர்மெண்டால் அவங்களுக்கு ஒரு சொல்யூஷனை கொடுக்கல அமைக்குது. அது மட்டும் இல்லாமல் இப்போ ஸ்ரீலங்கன் பீப்புள்ஸ்க்கு கூட விளங்கிட்டு ஸ்ரீலங்கா கவர்மெண்டால் வந்துட்டு ஒன்றுமே செஞ்சு கொள்ள ஏழாண்டு போய்த்தான் அவங்க வந்துட்டு இப்போதைக்கு டைரெக்டாக யூஎன்னை நாடுறாங்க. ரீசெண்டாக ஹியூமன் ரைட்ஸ்லேருந்து ஹியூமன் ரைட்ஸ்லேருந்து ஆட்கள் வந்து பார்த்துட்டு போய்த்தும் இது வரைக்கும் வந்துட்டு அவங்களுக்குரிய ஒரு சொல்யூஷனை இது வரைக்கும் கொடுத்தில்லை. ஏன் இன்னும் கொடுத்தில்லை?
Very good question. We keep asking the same thing. And now it's even more important. With what's happening politically, why is this not being done? So a political solution is one of the most critical things to ensure we don't go back to what was happening. There is a constitution reform process that has got stuck in Sri Lanka. We need a new constitution to at least give the broad framework. What we have now is not addressing those problems. It's not recognizing that citizens across Sri Lanka are equal. They have to have the decision-making power.